Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. The Timberwolves schedule is out, and they have how many national TV games this year? It's a crazy number. We'll talk about that. We'll break it down. Also give you my quick snapshot by month, my favorite games, my top 5 games of the first half of the season. And I'll give a prediction as well. There's lots to get to here today after the Wolves schedule release. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy NBA schedule release. It came out Thursday afternoon. We'd had a trickle here for a while, Christmas Day game. We had a sense for the Timberwolves' first game of the season, the in-season tournament or NBA Cup schedule. But now we've got the full thing, and we've had some time to digest it. I want to talk about a lot of stuff today. We'll talk about basically by month. I'll give my take. I'll give my 5 favorite games of the first part of the season. And then I'm also actually going to predict, I'm going to give a preliminary win total projection, which I usually hate to do it this early. I've talked about it a little bit on some other shows I've done recently, so maybe you've heard kind of what I'm thinking. But based on the schedule right now, and obviously things change, I'm going to give kind of a preliminary, like, hey, here's where I think they'll end up. I'll tell you if I think they'll be over or under their FanDuel projection that we talked about a couple weeks ago. So all that's upcoming on the show today. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. Of course, you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, which can be found in both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So let's go ahead and start with just kind of the highlights of the schedule, and then we'll get into a bit more the nitty-gritty here. The Timberwolves do a good job of releasing the schedule. Of course, the schedule release video is always fantastic. If you haven't seen that on social media, go check it out. But the cliff notes here, the highlights of the schedule itself, the Timberwolves open. We knew this already. We knew that the first game of the year was going to be, it had been reported by Shams Charania, I think on Tuesday of this week. They'll be at the Lakers opening the NBA season on Tuesday night, October 22nd. That is right after the Celtics ring ceremony game, which is like a 6:30 Central tip. The Timberwolves will tip at 9, the second game of the regular season for the entire NBA. And it'll be a TNT game, of course, on that opening night doubleheader. Then 2 nights later, they go to Sacramento for the Kings. I think it's their home. I think it's actually their season opener and home opener on that Thursday night. So they get the Lakers season home opener. They get the Kings season and home opener starting the year on a West Coast swing. Then they come home for their own home opener that Saturday night against Toronto. And then on that same homestand, they get Dallas and Denver, which are both national TV games that following week. So they get a couple of days off after the Toronto game. But then it's Dallas and Denver, TNT, ESPN. So 3 of the first 5 games are either TNT or ESPN. 3 of the first 5 are at home. And 3 of the first 5 come with 2 off days in between their games, that's true. Yes, 2 off days in between the Toronto-Dallas game and 2 off days between Dallas and Denver. So I guess technically 2 of them will come on 3 days rest. Or I guess 3 if you want to include the season opener at the Lakers. So an interesting start to the season. From there, and again, we'll go month by month here in a little bit. A couple other interesting tidbits. 3 of their 4 games against Portland come in a 5-day span from November 8th to the 13th, which is very weird. 2 of them in Portland and at Portland back-to-back on literal back-to-back, like on back-to-back nights. There's not a day in between, so that's weird. They get the Clippers twice out of 3 games from November 29th, which is the day after Thanksgiving. That's a home game on ESPN. And then also the following Wednesday, they play the Clippers in LA, and I believe it's the Lakers, or excuse me, not the Lakers, the Clippers one on the Friday night. That's an in-season tournament or an NBA Cup game. So you get the Clippers twice in 3 games there. They also get Golden State 3 out of 4 games in December. Now, in between there's that week with the NBA Cup where they get 2 additional games assigned. So ultimately it won't be that way, but it looks that way on the schedule. And they do have 2 straight games at Golden State, although not on back-to-back days. So that's another weird schedule quirk. A similar thing with Oklahoma City. They play OKC for the first time on New Year's Eve. Then they don't see them again until February. And then 3 out of their 4 games in mid-February are against the Thunder. All-Star breaks in the middle, so they play OKC at home. All-Star break happens. Then they play Houston coming out of the All-Star break, and then they have a home-and-home against OKC. Home against OKC on the 23rd of February. Then the very next night, they fly to Oklahoma City and take on the Thunder in a home-and-home back-to-back. So a weird one there. There's a couple of those on the schedule. They also have a home consecutive games, but not on back-to-back nights against the Pelicans in March. So another weird quirk there. Let's see, 6 of the first 10 games are at home. We know that. We talked about Christmas Day already. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The Wolves do have a Martin Luther King Jr. game this year. They play at Memphis on MLK Day, which is, it'll be great to see them play on the holiday. It's an afternoon game that day on TNT at Memphis, so that'll be fun. Let's see, what else did I want to hit here? Back-to-backs. They have 14 total back-to-backs on the season. 4 of them, both games are at home. 3 of them, both games are away. 3 are away home and 4 are home away. So it's pretty even. They have 1 more back-to-back set this year than they did last year. I already talked about the weird consecutive games against the same opponent thing too. So those are kind of the highlights. The national TV thing is fascinating. Last year when the schedule was announced, the Timberwolves only had 5 national TV games, which I thought was laughably low. I think it was like second least in the league if you take out teams that were just like horrendous the year before. But I want to say even like Charlotte and teams like that had a couple 3 games. The Timberwolves had 5, which I get that they weren't like, they didn't go to the conference finals 2 years ago, but they still had a rising star in Ant. They still had Karl-Anthony Towns. They still had Rudy Gobert. They were still a playoff team. And yet they had 5 national TV games to start the year last year. This season, the Timberwolves have 25 nationally televised games. And if you want to take out NBA TV games, and I don't blame you if you want to, although nowadays I feel like NBA TV, it feels like their circulation is almost, circulation, that's not the right word. Reach, I guess, is almost the same as some of those other stations. If you want to just go TNT, ESPN, ABC, the Timberwolves still have, 7 TNT, 7 NBA TV. So they have 18 total nationally televised games. So if you want to include NBA TV, that's nearly a third of their games. I mean, what's a third of 82? It would be like 27. So they'd be just a couple shy of a third of their games, which is crazy to think about that. With the Minnesota Timberwolves, 8 games on TNT. Most years they have 2. Now, last year they ended up with more because they tweaked the schedule. They add games, they subtract games as the year goes on. So they'll very likely end up with more than 25. But on the initial schedule, 25, 8 on TNT, 8 on ESPN, 2 on ABC. Of course, one of those is the Christmas Day game. They've got another one on a Saturday afternoon against Denver in late January, which likely will go up against a NFL championship weekend. Although I think it doesn't matter. But I think NFL championship, it might be a Saturday night game. Either way, right around the time of NFL playoffs, but it's a Saturday afternoon ABC game against Denver. So it's after, of course, college football is done and ABC starts doing more of the Saturday games. So I want to break down my 5 favorite games. And all I did is I took the first, actually, we'll do it by month first. I want to kind of break down let's do this. I'll do my 5 favorite games first, and then I'll go with month by month, like roughly how many wins I think they'll have per month. And then get into my total prediction for the season as of now. And I reserve the right to change it. We're 6 weeks out from preseason. So, that's probably going to get tweaked, but I'll give you my take on it sitting here right now, mid-August, smack dab in the middle of August, how many wins I think the Wolves will have. But I do want to give you my top 5 games, which, yes, I think 4 of the 5 are nationally televised games. So I'll give you my top 5 games. We'll go month by month. We'll do the total schedule, total wins for the season, all upcoming next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. It's super easy to do. Plus, the last-minute deals are amazing. You get up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. All of the above are things that I like to attend. Of course, sports, but my wife and I like to go to comedy shows, concerts with friends. We're big theater fans, believe it or not. I got there. I love theater now. It's true. They also have flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. There's also all-in pricing. You can toggle on that feature to show the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You have to turn on the feature in order to get it, but it is an awesome feature to make sure that you get everything up front so you're not surprised at the end. You could just take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or any other tickets, which is the best part about this, right? You just take all the guesswork out by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's simply no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so let's do my top 5 games of the first half of the season. And really what happened here is I was going to do top 5 for the year. I got to like the first week of January and I already had 5. And then I looked at the rest of the season and I was like, you know what? I could cherry pick like every Dallas, Phoenix, Denver game, Milwaukee, Boston, like that's easy, right? So I focused on the first half of the season because there are some like legit mark your calendar, don't miss this. Treat this like a Vikings game that happens once a week. Like these are games that you got to tune in to see. If you watch most Wolves games, not all of them, like don't miss these ones. And 4 of the 5 of them are legit national TV games. One's an NBA TV. So the first one is that first Friday, or I guess it's actually the first Friday game the Wolves play. Of course, they open on a Tuesday. So they play Tuesday, Thursday on the road the first week of the season. And then they go Saturday, Tuesday, Friday the following week. So Friday, November 1st at home against the Denver Nuggets. It's their third home game, the third of that 3-game homestand. It's an ESPN game, and it's an 8:30 p.m. Central tip. And it's coming on the heels of playing Dallas on Tuesday. So they have Dallas at home on Tuesday. Coming into that game, they're probably 3-0 at Lakers, at Kings versus Toronto. Maybe they're 2-1. Come home for Dallas on Tuesday. So there's a chance they're 4-0 or 3-1 with a big win over Dallas or, whatever that Tuesday. Or maybe they're coming off a loss against Dallas and they don't want to lose 2 in a row against conference foes. But at home against Denver, you can bet the Nuggets are going to be up for that game. You can bet the Timberwolves, of course, late tip on a Friday night in Minneapolis on ESPN. Crowd's going to be crazy. Denver's going to want revenge for this for the Game 7 loss last year, the blown lead against the Timberwolves and the way the Timberwolves destroyed them in Game 6 and came back to take the lead and win the series. That game is going to be a ton of fun. And, I could have picked the Dallas game 3 days before that, but the Friday night, the allure of the Friday night, the late tip, the Dallas game is a 6:30 TNT. And Denver, for whatever reason, I know Dallas beat the Wolves and I know it's Luka, but the Denver thing, going all the way back to Jimmy Butler game 82 year, like there's been a Jokic, Minnesota, Denver, and of course, all of the other, threads between the two. I don't need to rehash them all, but between, Ryan Saunders and Tim Connolly and Calvin Booth, if you want to, like all the former Nuggets on the Timberwolves. Now you got PJ Dozier in the mix, right? Like this thing, there's going to be threads that go through these teams for a long time. So that's the first one on my list. And then there's a bunch as we get into December. Friday, December 6th at Golden State, I have marked down as one that I'm really looking forward to. And that's coming off of like NBA in-season tournament or NBA Cup. Emirates NBA Cup is coming to a close there. They've already played the Clippers on national TV. It's the Friday, the week following Thanksgiving, and it's the first of 2 straight games in Golden State and 3 games against Golden State in December. The first time that the Timberwolves will see Steph Curry, former, Team USA teammates in Curry and Anthony Edwards, and of course, Team USA coach Steve Kerr facing off. So you can bet there'll be plenty of interviews and storylines there from ESPN. It's an ESPN game, 9 p.m. Central tip at Golden State on a Friday night. And there's going to be a lot of fanfare on a national level surrounding that game. That's going to be a ton of fun as well. The third one I have on my list is, of course, the Christmas Day matinee against the Dallas Mavericks. It's, I believe, the third game of the day, maybe the second game of the day on the NBA schedule. There's 5 games slated for that day. It's probably the second game. It's an ABC/ESPN game, Christmas Day at the Mavericks, 1:30 p.m. Central. Depending on what your Christmas Day, if you're celebrating Christmas Day, what your Christmas Day schedule looks like. For me, that's probably between family Christmases, so I think we should be good to watch it live. Of course, we're still doing shows that week, so you're still going to get a post-game pod leading into that Thursday, the day after Christmas. Don't worry. Following that Wolves Mavs game on Christmas afternoon. The fourth game I have on my list is New Year's Eve at Oklahoma City. The first time the Timberwolves and Thunder will face off this season. Of course, they split the season series last year. 2 years ago, the Wolves beat the Thunder in the play-in, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker shut down cousin SGA. SGA has a further breakout year last year. We see the OKC Minnesota almost rivalry grow together with a couple of not close games and a couple of very close games, and in-season tournament clashes last season as well. And then of course, the Thunder at the end of the season surge in to get the 1 seed past the Timberwolves. The Wolves end up facing the Mavs after the Mavs knock out the Thunder in round 2 of the playoffs. And OKC gets knocked out in the second round. Of course, our friend Jack Borman, the co-host of the Locked On Wolves postcast, is on the Basketball Party every Wednesday. He is not he thinks the Thunder hype train is out of control. We talked a little about that on Wednesday at the end of the show. If you missed that, it's actually the episode before this one on the audio feed. We talked about the Timberwolves. What did we talk about? I guess it was division favorites on FanDuel, et cetera. And he had some words about FanDuel and what FanDuel and others think about OKC. But anyway, Wolves at Thunder on New Year's Eve. It's in Oklahoma City, 7 p.m. Central tip on NBA TV. But on New Year's Eve, the crowd's going to be crazy. It always is in OKC. And the first time those two teams face all season will be a ton of fun. And then my next game is actually the game following that. The Wolves don't play New Year's Day. But on Thursday, January 2nd, the Timberwolves host the Boston Celtics for the one and only time the Celtics come to Minneapolis this season. It's a TNT game, 6:30 p.m. on the day after New Year's. So if anyone's taking a couple of weeks off for the holiday, if anyone's taking, New Year's Day is a Wednesday, how many people are just going to take Thursday and Friday off? Probably a lot. Should be a lot of fun having the Celtics back. Of course, last year it was week 2 of the season when the Timberwolves and Celtics went to overtime, and there was the Jason Tatum back and forth in Minneapolis, and it's just one of the best games of the year very early in the season. Got to wait until January 2nd for the Celtics to visit Target Center, but that game is number 5 on my list of my absolute favorite games on the schedule this season. That one's going to be a doozy. And there you have it. That's like 5 fantastic games and only about halfway through the actual schedule, just into January, not even the first full week of January. If we look at this thing by month, and I'm going to start at the beginning of the year, I'll kind of give you my month by month. I wrote like a sentence on each month, and I'll give you kind of roughly how many wins I think they'll get. I did go game by game. Of course, I should also make clear that the Timberwolves only have 80 games on their schedule right now. There's 2 games that are not scheduled based on the results of the in-season tournament. So, of course, there's that weird gap in December. They play on the 8th. They play on the 19th. There's 11 days in between there. So we're either going to be in the semis or I guess quarters, semis, and finals of the in-season tournament. Sorry, NBA Cup. Or they'll be having 2 extra games added like they did last year when they didn't make that tournament. So this is out of 80 games. What I said about October, November, and I lumped those 2 together because they only play for a couple weeks in October. The sentence I wrote about that is they should get off to a good start. You look at the schedule in October, November. We talked already about that opening road trip. There's a real shot they go 3-0 at Lakers, at Sacramento, home for Toronto are their first 3 games. And no rest disadvantage there. It's going to be tough playing teams' home openers in both LA and Sacramento. But I think they go 2-1 or 3-0 there. You come home for Dallas or Toronto, Dallas, Denver. I think they go at least 2-1 there. You go at San Antonio, home for Charlotte, at Chicago, home for Portland on a back-to-back, probably 3-1 in that group of games. Like you might lose a back-to-back there. Portland should be one of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst team in the West. But it's still a back-to-back, or you maybe lose at Wemby, but they easily could go 4-0 in those games. And then you go Miami, consecutive games in Portland. It's tough to beat a team 3 times. I do think they'll beat Portland 3 times in that group of games. Portland's going to be that bad that I think they can beat them 3 times in 4 games. At Sacramento's tough. Phoenix, you have at Boston mixed in there, and then home for the Kings and the Clippers to close out the month. I've got the Wolves over October, November. I have them at 13-5. Once we get to Once November's over, post-Thanksgiving, I think they're sitting there at about 13-5. I think they'll get off to a strong start. But mixed in there, you've got a couple of back-to-backs early in the season. You've got at Boston, which is obviously very tough. You've got, I guess that's really your toughest road game, at Sacramento, at San Antonio, actually at Sacramento twice. So I think they're sitting at about 13 wins once we get through the month of November. Let's do the rest of the season. I'll give you a total win total here at the end. I'll give you my one sentence recap of each other month. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. I love sports. We all love sports. I love sports so much that I never want them to stop. But late in the summer, now that the Olympics are over, WNBA is about to kick back off. You get the tail end of baseball season. Football hasn't really started. The sports just aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. We talked win totals a little while ago. We'll talk about the Wolves win total on FanDuel here. I'll tell you what it is right now. It's 52.5 on FanDuel. I'll talk about if I would take the over or the under on that. We'll talk a lot more win totals as we get closer to the season. But the Wolves right now, I think, have like the third best odds on FanDuel in order to win the championship this year. Lots of fun futures over there. And not just basketball, of course. We're getting into football season. There's plenty of stuff there for the NFL and college as well. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. You only got a couple weeks left here in summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so through October, November, I have the Wolves at 13 wins. December, the sentence I wrote down about December is it's a tough schedule in terms of opponents, but there's no back-to-backs and plenty of opportunity for rest in the month of December. You look at that December schedule. You get the Lakers at home. At the Clippers is, of course, difficult. At Golden State is difficult twice. Home for the Knicks, very difficult. Again, the Golden State, this time at home. You get to go at Atlanta, which is the probably the worst opponent they play in the month. They don't have that many games on the schedule because, again, you got the in-season tournament, the NBA Cup gap in there. At Dallas on Christmas, at Houston. Again, no back-to-backs here. Home for the Spurs, and then at OKC, which we talked about on New Year's Eve. So every single one of those teams is going to at least threaten for a playoff spot, right? There's no Detroit. There's no Portland. There's no Charlotte. Like, those guys are not mixed in there. Atlanta, obviously beatable teams, right? Like, the Wolves should beat Atlanta. They should beat Houston. They should beat San Antonio. But they're all competitive teams. Every single game in December, the 11 on the schedule are all difficult games. But there's no rest issues. There's no back-to-backs here. So I have the Wolves at 7 wins in December. That doesn't include the 2 that we don't know who they'll play, or if they're going to be in the NBA Cup, in which case they'd have an additional game that, of course, then doesn't count towards the regular season schedule. We know what happened to the Lakers last year after they won the in-season tournament, right? Of course, they ended up a little stronger than they were initially coming out of that tournament. But anyway, so I have the Wolves at 7 wins in December, 7-4. I have them potentially losing one of those 2 games at Golden State. It's going to be hard to win them both. I know Golden State wasn't great last year, but I would expect at least something of a bounce back this year. Perhaps losing at home to the Knicks. I think, like, between the home Knicks game and the home Golden State game, they maybe lose one of those. Losing at Dallas and potentially losing at OKC on New Year's Eve. That's a tough schedule in December. I just think the rest advantage will help them, make it at least reasonable. January, it's a little road heavy, but the schedule takes a much friendlier turn. We start with Boston. We talked about that, but you get at Detroit mixed in there. I know Orlando's decent, but at Orlando should be all right for the Wolves. At Washington, home for Memphis. They're home for Cleveland. We'll see about that one. At Memphis. Of course, Memphis, we know, will be better this year, expecting John Morant to be healthy and on the floor and other guys to be healthy. There are a couple tough ones. At Dallas, home for Denver, but you also get home for Atlanta mixed in. At Utah, at Phoenix. At Utah is a road back-to-back. So a little bit of an easier schedule compared to December, but multiple back-to-backs mixed in there and more road games. So I have them actually at 12-4 in January, which is maybe a little on the optimistic side. I think they probably lose at New Orleans that month. They probably lose one of the games at Phoenix. They lose one of the games against Memphis. and maybe home for Cleveland because that's a back-to-back. It's a road home back-to-back. So I had them maybe winning at the Knicks, losing at home to Cleveland. I don't think they win both of those games. So I think it's an 11 or 12 win month for the Timberwolves in January because it's a little easier than December, but it's not exactly a walk in the park. February feels like a pretty balanced schedule to me. The overall breakdown in February is, let's see, I believe that it's about, I guess it's a little more home heavy. So it's 8 games at home, 5 on the road in February. But the schedule itself balances out. You've got a couple easy. You got the first 5-game homestand of the season for the Wolves in there, and they're all very winnable games. Washington, Sacramento, Chicago, Houston, and Portland. None of those teams were playoff teams last year. Chicago was in the play-in. That's it. 5 very winnable games. Washington, Sacramento, Chicago, Houston, Portland. They could win all 5 of those. In fact, I think they probably will. You have at Cleveland, then you get home for Milwaukee, home for OKC, which are a back-to-back. So you're probably splitting those at Houston, home and road, home and home, I should say, against OKC, an actual back-to-back, and then another back-to-back 2 days later at Lakers, at Utah. So a very difficult close to the month. They probably, lose at least one of the 3 to OKC. They perhaps lose to Houston, mixed in there right out of the All-Star break. They've got an at the Clippers mixed in there. So I've got them at 8-5 in February, which I think is still a reasonable number. And that's even with banking 5 wins against those bad teams at the beginning of the month. And you figure they lose one of those. Now you're looking at maybe just a 7-win month. So February gets a little bit dicey in my book. I combine March and April, which is a ton of games, but I always feel weird just leaving April as like those 2 weeks by themselves. And I actually really like the Wolves schedule in March is not too bad. It gets hard when the season ends. So they have another 5-game homestand from March 14th to 21st. Again, very winnable games. Home for Orlando, Utah, Indiana, and then 2 games against the Pelicans. So they probably win, 3-2 or 4-1, hopefully 4-1 among those 5 games. They've also got a 4-game road trip mixed in, which is part of 6 road games in 8. And then they have a 5-game road trip. Get this, the first week of April at Denver, at Brooklyn, that won't be hard, at Philadelphia, at Milwaukee, and at Memphis. If they go 3-2, they should feel fortunate on that road trip. To win in Denver, Philadelphia, and one of Milwaukee or Memphis, I think should be the goal. So that's a 3-2, maybe 4-1 road trip. It's actually a really hard close to the season. By my count, that's 21 games. I think they go 15-6 in those 21, which is probably about the winning percentage they should have, maybe a game worse than that. All put together, if we look at what I've predicted so far this season, and this is only out of 80 games, they'll be in the neighborhood of 55 wins, which is, of course, over the 52.5 at FanDuel. Last season, they won 56 games. I'm at 55 without those extra 2. So if they split those, then they go 56-26, which is exactly what they did last year. Pretty unlikely they turn in the exact same win total. What I said on the basketball party on Wednesday, if you heard that show, I predicted toward the end of the show, and we talked over under win total projections very early. And again, I said this before, I reserve the right to change this. They don't play a regular season game for 2 months, which is, it's still coming up quick, but actually 9 weeks from now is when they have their first regular season game. Almost exactly. I do think they'll go over 52.5. I think it's a relatively easy over. But of course, we're also assuming relative health. I think the ceiling of this team is probably somewhere around 60 wins, like legitimately. However, the Western Conference, and I know Karl-Anthony Towns missed 5-ish weeks last year, but other than that, they were fairly healthy. Mike Conley's a year older. Rudy's a year older and played internationally. They're relying on Joe Ingles, who's 5 years older than Kyle Anderson, to be at the end of the rotation. So relying on some younger guys. I worry that I don't know that they'll get to 56 wins again. I do think they're in the 54 to 56 range with the real potential to push 60. I don't think they go below 52 unless they have a catastrophic injury to a very important player or two. Which of course would be a nightmare scenario for everybody. And I don't even want to spend any more time thinking about it. But if they're relatively healthy, I think you're in the 52 to 58 range. My best guess is I would call it 55. And I honestly, what I did when I did the schedules, I went through and I went win, loss, whatever. Well, more wins than losses, win, loss, win, something like that. You get the idea. And I didn't actually look until I totaled up at the end. I did this Thursday after the schedule came out. I predicted on Wednesday, I think I actually did say 55. I said over 52.5 on the show, on the basketball party. But when I finished, I had 55 wins. It was remarkable. So that's what I think is going to happen this year for the Wolves. I think it's going to be a very similar year to last year, but with higher upside. And of course, a year more experience under Ant's belt is going to make him that much more dangerous. We'll talk a lot more about the schedule as we move forward. And actually next week, looking to do a crossover with Locked On Kings, talk a little Jordan McLaughlin with Matt George of Locked On Kings. And also he wants to talk about the Kings season opener against the Wolves, which will be game 2 for Minnesota. So we might run some of that on this show. And we'll get into some roster stuff here. Things just keep happening. I haven't gotten there yet, but we right now we're still 3 shows a week through the month of August, and we'll be back to 5 shows at some point there in September as well. So lots to look forward to as we cruise through the offseason. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, you can also follow me on X. That's at Locked On T-Wolves, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. Yeah, and a big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. Now go check out Locked On NBA, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description of this show, so you don't need to go searching for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.